So good evening. We want to welcome everybody to tonight's lecture, which is part of the Syracuse University Humanities Program Series. Given that we know that there's some faculty and students from other departments on campus with us this evening, we'd like to introduce ourselves.
So I'm Julie Larson, Associate Professor here and Chair of the Graduate Program.
I'm Brett Eversole, Assistant Professor in the School of Architecture. And tonight we're going to be the MCs for the lecture and conversation with renowned landscape architect Julie Bargmann. First, we'd like to offer the university's land acknowledgement, which takes on a particularly poignant meaning tonight in the context of a lecture and a lecture series about the challenging landscapes of the United States and the North American continent, landscapes that are historically, politically, and environmentally fraught, and yet are one of the most important resources that we all share in common. So I acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, the fire keepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse now stands. Tonight's event is part of an ongoing annual Syracuse Symposium, currently in its 20th year, sponsored by the Syracuse University Humanities Center. The 23-24 theme is landscapes, which seems like a prescient lens for bringing together diverse disciplines across campus to address crucial contemporary issues for a fractured nation. We would first like to thank the Humanities Center for their generous sponsorship of tonight's event and to acknowledge the indispensable role that they play in forging interdisciplinary collaboration and supporting the humanities at a time when they are increasingly under pressure. We encourage everybody to attend as many of these exciting lectures as possible, including the next lecture in 2 weeks by philosopher Timothy Morton, whose talk will undoubtedly complement tonight's event, as well as a following lecture on art and ecology by Susanna Saylor and Ed Morris, and the upcoming panel discussion on landscapes of abortion access organized by Professors Lori Brown and Professor Tara Pearson. We'd like to thank the School of Architecture also for co-sponsoring tonight's event, in particular Dean Michael Speaks, Associate Dean Kyle Miller, as well as staff members Deborah Witter-Gamba, Laurie Mataloni, and Andy Malloy and the IT team here in the School of Architecture. Tonight's event is also part of the School of Architecture's new curricular initiative of directed research. Rather than thesis, our students collaborate with faculty on shared research initiatives. Our groups, Julie and I teach one together. Our group is investigating the chemical landscapes of North America, their long entanglement with architecture through practices of extraction, the invention and wide application of synthetic materials, and the environmental consequences of those material practices in the context of architecture, and certainly landscapes and environments. Tonight's event complements the research of our students, and it affords them the opportunity to hear from, and tomorrow to share their research with, a pioneer in the field of design who works with the problematic substances of the built environment and from whom we have taken much inspiration. So here's our plan for tonight. My colleague Julie Larson will introduce our guest. After the lecture, we will join her and Julie Bargmann on the stage to begin to unpack the presentation as well as her many years of research, teaching, designing, and speculating, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So with that, my colleague Julie Larson will take over and introduce our guest.
Hello, everybody. So tonight we are thrilled and honored to welcome to Syracuse University landscape architect and fellow in the American Society of Landscape Architects, Julie Bargmann. She is the founder and principal of the award-winning D.I.R.T studio. D.I.R.T stands for Dump It Right There, and an ethos that drives not only her approach to design and site, as well as her approach to innovative and creative uses of found materials, but also underlines the importance of land art in Bargmann's thinking, as well as her playful approach to precision and rigor, combined with spontaneity and chance. Since its founding in 1992, D.I.R.T Studio has consistently explored some of the most fundamental themes of the built environment, the natural environment, and the denatured environment. Those themes include economies of means, both in terms of materials and labor, forging neighborhood and community connections with otherwise abandoned and neglected sites, and careful interrogation of the histories of those troubled sites, and above all, a love for landscape. Her groundbreaking work has, as well as her reputation for versatile thinking and a hands-on experimental approach to making, have been acknowledged both within and far beyond the professional architectural press. Metropolis magazine called her the toxic beauty queen of brownfield remediation, while the New York Times crowned her the queen of slag and toxic avenger. The entire gendered term of queen notwithstanding, the nicknames point to her willingness to take on industrial sites, degraded urban landscapes, and impossible projects that no one else would dare to touch, and to produce provocative designs and experiences that educate and that change minds without using cliched aesthetic tricks or attempting to make us feel, quote unquote, better about the precarious state of the environment. And the results are both aesthetically rich and socially conscious, never condescending and always demanding, and always charting new ways of being not simply ecologically conscious, but of being ecologically progressive and projective. Julie Bargmann earned her BFA in sculpture at Carnegie Mellon University, where earning her master's in landscape architecture at Harvard University. She is a professor emerita at the University of Virginia, and it must be mentioned that she also has had a very long career as a widely respected professor of landscape architecture and design. Among the numerous awards and accolades that she and D.I.R.T Studio have earned are a Rome Prize Fellowship from American Academy in Rome, the National Design Award from the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt Museum, and most recently she is the inaugural recipient of the Cornelia Oberlander International Prize in Landscape Architecture. Simplicity of form, use of existing materials, deliberate restraint, and a fascination with the substances of our post-industrial world are all hallmarks of her evocative landscapes, which brings us to her lecture today, Toxic Beauty. Waste is the design fodder of our time. Please welcome Julie Bargmann.
Thanks so much. So nice to be invited. Go ahead, Dean Julia is taking a picture. We go way back, so she's allowed. Toxic beauty. I want to make it clear that, which I feel like I need to in terms of the different definitions and the gradation of the kind of landscapes that we all have the privilege of addressing if we so choose to. I was always corrected a lot by environmental engineers about the language I was using in terms of how to qualify these different landscapes. But I found that it was very liberating to do that. Oh, by the way, that is the little logo that the Humanities Center put together for the talk. I do want to call your attention to the bifurcation there between toxic orange and pretty nice blue, which you'll hear my argument about that. I'm also going to be dragging you through a little bit, maybe because I'm getting old. I've been pretty reflective, but I want to talk about my own origins of why it is that I think I've gravitated towards this. And then a little bit, sorry to say, of a retrospective of D.I.R.T work. I think just to show you my own and my crew evolution through working with toxic and degraded landscapes. So I would say that a lot of it has to do with your perspective and your experiences in relationship to these landscapes. I always felt that I was very normal in really liking the refineries along the New Jersey.
We need to turn on your microphone.
Oh.
Apparently we've...
Sorry.
That's okay.
Is it on? Shit. Sorry about that. I hope you guys heard before. Jeez. Okay. I'm going to put this further away from my loud mouth. Maybe that'll work. Yes. Okay. Oh, and then it says feedback because it's by my boobs. Okay. No, that's not good. What's going on?
Mic down.
I mean, there's a lot of feedback in my work, but...
That should be better.
How's that? No, now, does that do anything? Not really. How's that?
Maybe
No.
put it back here. We're gonna get this right.
We're going to get this right. Okay, because it's upside down and backwards. If I do it right, is that better?
That's better.
How's that?
Good.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so we'll start back from when I was 4 years old in New Jersey. There is something about I think a sensibility that I really actually didn't understand until I went back and realized that those landscapes were actually, I kind of ingested them. I had to remind myself of that when I was encountering folks who just felt like that, those landscapes were other. And a lot of people think they're other, especially when I started working in this arena 30 years ago. It was my love of the industrial landscape got pretty dialed up when I went to art school in Pittsburgh. And actually, I was, a lot of the mills were still on the floodplain of the rivers there. And I just want to show a kind of a wonderful thing that happened, that this mill right here in Pittsburgh, however many years later, can't do the arithmetic, in 2019 I worked on that mill in the regeneration of it. Those are happy things that happen. I really have to say I went full tilt in trusting my instinct to be interested in these industrial landscapes, and the scale obviously was amazing to work with. And I always looked at these landscapes, I realized, as not this kind of like thing in themselves, but what was like impregnated in them, and that would be always generations of people who worked there. And of course, Robert Smithson, also from New Jersey, contaminated person, was my hero. And I took the cue, if you can see his kind of call there to work with these crazy landscapes. I took his cue to give form, and here I'd like to point out that I've always used form and referred to it as a noun and a verb. Mostly a noun, not mostly a verb, of like to form. So, this aesthetic and environmental dynamism was just, too good to be true. So then I entered into decades of where I was practicing and teaching full time, both of them. I don't recommend that. But it was really fabulous because the students, and yes, that's us at D.I.R.T. We have gotten into hazmat, hazardous clothing, but they're very claustrophobic. I wouldn't recommend it. But the important thing here was the teaching. And with venturing into this kind of new territory, the students were so cool because they were so willing to just go along for the ride, with me. I would say, I have no idea what's up with landfills. Let's learn about it. I don't know steel manufacturing. Let's do it. And they'd all be like, yes, we'll do it. And so they really fed D.I.R.T. work, and then D.I.R.T. work in turn fed the teaching. So it was a really, beautiful reciprocal loop. So I'm gonna, this lecture is in 5 parts. So these, there's always that kind of like weird combo of like toxic beauty and troubled beauty, right? Because that kind of, for me, points out that there's this kind of, that there's this conflict, between them, but it's actually, in my mind, it's a dialectic, as Smithson would say, in that they were conflicting forces that were actually interdependent. They were dependent upon each other. So that's what I was always interested in. And then, of course, there was kind of the imperative and actually the opportunity to work on these sites. There are a few projects here, I would also say. And at the time, 30 years ago, and still to this day, they're mostly the purview of environmental engineers, and we need to take them back, damn it, because the environmental engineers are seeing them only as this problem and to clean up, which you can never clean them up, right? So they, don't get me going. I can't, very myopic approach. So. Environmental laws only came into being, in the late 1970s. I know you guys, a lot of you guys were born after that. but a lot of other older folks here were not born into a world that had where the environment had rights, which was really wild, right? That we had to wait till the 1970s to, hear from, before that, Rachel Carson, to actually give that environment the rights, and it has a voice. So it's been really interesting to kind of work towards. Then, the laws and the legislation were also very interesting, and they kind of showed this regard of those landscapes still being other, and actually also not socially relevant and not culturally relevant. It was a very, very myopic view. So, EPA was really fun to work with. So, in my mind, there are two obstacles in terms of perception. One are these pastoral ideas that are like still have a really strong hold, especially if you're working with the general public. They believe green reigns. And also the other obstacle were these ridiculous engineered solutions, which usually meant hauling toxins away, contaminants away, or covering them up. I always depended on artists who were bringing a lot of these landscapes into view, especially the photographers like Mizrak and Hansen, Smithson too, that were just, like I say here, they were putting the environmental crisis in our face. And this was a real moment of revelation for me, because, I was working, actually it was like a time where I'd be typing away, and I would type in remediation, and they didn't even know what remediation was, and the spell check, if you remember spell check, came up and it said redemption. I was like, okay. And then you look it up and you investigate, and it means correcting a fault. Okay, so it's a solution, okay, dead end in my mind. Versus regeneration, which for me became the complete substitute. I never said remediation again, I don't think, or if I did, I got an electrical shock. And it's the act of creating something anew. So I'm going to be talking a lot about cycles and time in working with these landscapes, and that the opportunity here is transformation. This is a really early seminal project for me. It was pretty amazing to get a call from a historian to work with an artist and a hydrogeologist on acid mine drainage, which basically pollutes and kills all life in, we were working in southwestern Pennsylvania, and there were 1,800 miles of waterways. So we had the opportunity to learn about a passive treatment system, which was still, like when I photographed this, it was behind a chain link fence, and it was actually pretty butt ugly, and it just wasn't, it wasn't as visible as the artist and I especially were talking about the possibilities, but it in essence tracks acid mine drainage, which I'm supposed to never call water. It's an unstable aqueous solution. And the pH would be about 2.9 pH. That would kind of eat through some things. But through this whole process of these basins that I'll show you, it comes out biologically rich water. You can say water then. So we did basically a demonstration project because we wanted to test out the passive treatment system out in the larger landscape next to a community, also along a regional trail. So this was the site of Vinton Colliery, a coke works, and coke, if you don't know, coke is an ingredient in making steel. So all of this coke was going to Pittsburgh, and you can see it's the off-gassing completely denuded the forest, surrounding forest, and then the acid mine drainage would go into the creek and turn it bright orange because of the iron and kill everything in it. We wanted to add not add, unearth the layer of kind of social history of the legacy of labor. And these are actually the miles and miles of mine tunnels. And there are gentlemen crawling along it was the Catani B seam. All coal seams are different. This coal seam, the Catani B seam, was only 4 feet high. And so they had to crawl to work. And sometimes they had a 45-minute commute. Imagine. So you kind of learn about that, and you kind of start to feel a little different, about what you're looking at. And then you get to work with, scientists, and open engineers. And I just look at this, and my heart, sings because I love Bob. Bob did that drawing up top. We were like, Bob, draw it. And he was like, I can't draw. He's like, come on, Bob. So we gave him an artistic license. We actually laminated it and gave it to him. And that's him drawing what the acid mine drainage, the passive treatment system would look like. And this is Stacy Levy, the artist, and I looking at how it is that we would give it some legibility, so that the transformation would be visible. And we started to name it things like the litmus garden and yada, yada, yada. This is a bit of a fancy pants site plan, but what it represents is really what is a giant ecological washing machine. The acid mine drainage is, lifted out from going into the creek. It goes through these basins where it's, the pH is being risen, and then it goes through a final rinse in the wetlands, and then is released back out into the creek. So these pH ponds work as this series, and this is another time where I just have to point out that Bob was just so incredible. I go, Bob, would you please, enumerate the system here? And look what he did, the sweetheart. It starts with rainfalls, and it ends with rainfalls. I get goosebumps every time I think about that. What a guy. So. So we had to do things. I did this project pro bono, and because nobody even would believe these projects. And we did things like bartering with the excavator here. We let the excavator said, we'll shape the ponds for you if we can take some of the bony away. It's called, these are mine tailings, and some of the bony still had fuel value, so it was great. They sold off the fuel value, and we got our ponds. And then the folks from Vittendale helped out with the planting, not as free labor. I hate that, but to instill this idea that this was their landscape, because they were going to have it in their backyard for a long time. And now this is the park, and I have to say it doesn't look like much in terms of form, but it's formed and it's working. It's truly a working landscape, or it's reworking. So the next shift. So what became apparent with Vittendale is that in a way what we were doing is we were doing the next shift. We were doing the next cycle of work of the miners, right? Because it's all one big cycle. So there was there's a ... on the project in Vittendale, and there should be a ... on every project. But it's this idea of encouraging what is the next evolution of a landscape, not a solution. So, and again, the primary lessons from Smithson. One, he is amazing how he thinks in very deep time. Because if you think in geological terms, industry is only a blip on the screen. A lot of people don't like when I say that. But it is, so it's like, get over it, stop moaning, do something about it. Go to the next, go to the next cycle, here. So this is his proposal for the Bingham Pit copper mine, and I love it because it's so much about geology in reverse. My students, phenomenal. They really worked on how to represent these cycles, to incorporate them, to look at time, in a way kind of instilling patience in themselves. And for me, when they would do stuff like this, I would show it to clients, and just say, this is about patience, about you just taking the time to regenerate your landscape. So that lesson went to Detroit with the Ford River Rouge plant. And it was amazing how hard it was to communicate this idea of cycles to them. They're just, all right, I'm flashing to another thing. This guy in the environmental office, they had beautiful Albert Kahn buildings that they clad and corrugated, and some things they took down. And we were kind of like, dude, what about that building? And he stood there and he'd go, it's inactive. It's inactive. And we're like, okay, never mind. So, I mean, it just, so we realized that there was almost like we had to tell them their own story. I mean, these are, artists that Henry commissioned, right, to depict work, and to celebrate work. So, and how it is, that they need to consider their legacy in all its kind of complicatedness. I mean, amazing. And along with the fact that, the River Rouge was the first integrated manufacturing plant in the world. I mean, that dude Henry was, unbelievable. He did some of the most environmental stuff. But they had to remember that it was these folks, sweat that was in the ground there, okay? It wasn't just contaminants. Their sweat was in the ground. Except maybe Bonnie, that's Bonnie of Bonnie and Clyde. That badass, drove a Model T. And, call me sentimental, but I loved when we used to find things like on the left there are the wooden clogs. The workers would wear those on their boots so the soles of their boots would not melt on top of the coke ovens. I mean, yeah, another thing of like that crawl to a working face in a coal mine, same thing here. So the overall idea was super simple, and that is the main thing is it was a level of transparency, because Ford had actually in other industries with the environmental laws coming along actually started to go into hiding. They clad their buildings. They put here along Miller Road, they put huge mounds and evergreen trees. They stopped their tours, and it's just like, really? So it was a big deal. We're basically asking, to come out, and celebrate their processes. And if their processes weren't, worthy of being exposed, then they should think twice about them. But anyway, this was the main idea here of these kind of industrial gardens. Now, in this case, I want to point out that this was always really fun to do, and that the folks from the environmental office didn't think we knew squat, about contamination or any of that of the industrial processes. So that's us up top there doing our homework and showing them, and they were like, okay, then they listened to us. The guy used to cringe when I came in the room at first, but then we just built trust, that we knew what they were up against, and that led to kind of curating that to know what was hot and what was not. And we had this idea of this juxtaposition of a new type of industry called phytoremediation, right, treating contaminants with plants, and how that would be in relationship to, we were making a argument to preserve the coke ovens. They were going to haul them away. So simple, not much to look at, really. But there's the juxtaposition of the phytoremediation gardens in front of the coke ovens in the power plant. And, I mean, what's cool, you know, there isn't much design capital D here. Didn't win any FASLA award, but it's fine. But what we won was the environmental, the guy in charge of the environmental department, we spoke together at a Wildlife Habitat Council, the guy that hated me. I was like, you know, because I just made that project his, and he just was like, and Clayton Rue, Dr. Rue, got a lot of data out of these gardens that were visible to the public from Miller Road. And he went on to do more phytoremediation for Ford and other plants, and Ford got bragging rights. They go on and on about it now, you know. But, and again, they took the next shift, you know. I mean, coke ovens are gone, you know, so what is the next iteration there? Just ground. So, as I think many of you know, contamination occurs most frequently in low-income neighborhoods. My friend would always say when I was going off to a project, she goes, "Now, Julie, you going off to more poor soils and poor people?" I said, "Yeah, I am," you know. So, yeah, not great. And I have found that is kind of like an sorry, I couldn't help myself. Explicit exercise of really understanding, you know, we were instinctually kind of decoding the data, you know, that was really hard to decipher in engineering reports. But we knew that we needed to spatialize it. And we needed to know also, since a lot of the EPA sites and a lot of the engineers only look at the isolated site, they weren't really mapping out who was downwind and downstream. So it's true, toxins, contaminants go where they want to go, and it's, I think, our duty to be able to spatialize them. And I would say that just like similar to the Ford project, that it was actually just a moment in time that those phytoremediation gardens produced the data, and then they went on. But that design is about designing a process, a course of action. And here a quick sketch by David Hill, which is a dirt dance and a process of creating a clean fill at a dirt farm. We also put it in a place where the community could see it. So if you're going to take action, you got to take action. The master plans, to me, are stagnant straitjackets. I think they've met their demise, but I think there's still some watercolors out there of master plans that just probably won't come true, but that instead you could make action plans that actually let places develop over time and as needed. So this project, Big Mud Action Plan, I collaborated with the artist Mel Shin and Howard Milkey, the toxicologist, and some of the UVA graduate students jumped in on the project. But I love this illustration, this drawing, that montage that Mel did. He calls it the disaster before the disaster, because right there we see, you know, New Orleans. Everyone talks about Katrina. There's Katrina, but underneath you'll see that is the map of the leaded soils. So this is, we worked with Dr. Milkey to work on spatializing where the levels of lead concentrations were. And I always like to point out here that other fun facts to know are regulations. Well, they're not really fun to know, but, well, actually they are, you know. But this is one where you decode that. 400, 1200, 1800. 400 is the EPA standard in terms of treatment. That level is acceptable, okay? In Europe, it's 100 parts per million. And Dr. Melke made the point with the research that leaded soils harm, especially children, at 100 parts per million. So I would always ask the client, where are you going to draw the line with that? So Mel with Operation Pager, had this idea that we would actually, in a way, perversely, maybe take advantage of the land that was vacant and open to launch this citywide initiative for getting the lead out, although you don't get the lead out. And I think this is the funny thing that Mel did too. So it was Operation Pager. It had two components of it. There's the Funded. That's the fundraising that I'll show you in a minute. And then we came in as Big Mud to implement this whole scheme. The $100 project is totally ingenious. He sent lessons all over the United States, and kids, he goes, well, how are we going to do this? And he said, well, we have to make the money. He said, no, we're going to make the money. So they're making the money, literally. It's amazing. And an armored car goes around and collects them from around the United States. It goes to the federal, the Funded Reserve in DC, and ultimately the idea is that they will get full cash exchange from the Senate. Is on its way. So there's art, and then science. Gotta love science. I only know it as much as I have to, but what we are learning here is that you actually can't get lead out of soils. The one thing you can do is lock it by turning it into, having it convert to a non-bioavailable substance. So there's lead, and then it's apatite 2 was what we were using, but you can also use biosolids, and it converts into pyromorphite, which is not harmful. The other ingredient for our mud pie was the sediment, the clean sediment from the Bonnet Carey spillway. I mean, they would open it up once in a while with floods, and thousands upon thousands of clean tons of sediment could come from it. So the idea was that if we go into the recipe here, the recipe would be that you would lock the lead, and that then we would put a layer of clean sediment just to kind of be really sure that it wasn't in harm's way for kids playing in dirt, and then it's also helpful for growing the new urban canopy. Big Mud came in and said, well, how the heck are we going to do this? How are we going to get the ingredients and the information from the extra large to the extra small? So here you see this idea of the extra large mud depots, and throughout all the different concentrations, we would go into the neighborhood and introduce these other scales of operation. So there's the mud depot, so that would be stockpiling, drying, packaging, and also at each scale there'd be different action figures. Like at this level, it would be the Army Corps of Engineers, and probably the New Orleans Redevelopment, Authority, and then you'd go down to the scale of the wheelbarrow with a mud square, and there's where there would be some training and some soil testing, and being able to distribute right there in different neighborhoods. Okay, working traces. Basically, site histories rule at D.I.R.T. And we've always talked about the importance of site forensics, we call it, of finding the evidence of the work. And it's a way to honor the generations that worked there. like I said, it's site forensics, and it takes time to find things, but it's the act of finding that's so important. And then if you get groovy clients like Urban Outfitters, they will dig you trenches, indulge you, and we dug like archaeology trenches, and then that's me waiting to work with a contractor who I had to kind of teach new tricks and being precise about where it was that they were going to begin to demolish the concrete. This leads to my big mantra here, and I do hands here. I go, design emerges, it doesn't descend. And anytime, I feel like something's happening about like this, I go, just stop it, and just am I doing this all the time? One nice small instance of it, this project in Dallas, Texas, one of the smallest projects that we ever did. It's under an acre. And this design methodology, I have to say, really came to fruition there. A client that totally allowed experimentation. And what we were working with was this historic pump house, and it was in the middle of probably the most affluent neighborhood in Dallas, Texas. And this client bought it and wanted to preserve it. I was like, what? And then you arrive and that's what you find. And you come upon this and you just go, I just can't mess it up. I mean, it's already great. So the idea is how to kind of work on this. I always work on this process of, addition, subtraction, and then leaving well enough alone. Leaving well enough comes in, is probably the fulcrum there. So anyway, beginning that kind of curatorial process, we looked at the tanks, which are like to die for, and then all the areas around the tanks. There was the landscape of the bluff, there was the landscape of the lake, so on each side, it was like we pulled up the blanket, around the tanks to really exaggerate their void. And what had to come up was all of this concrete. And my client came out, remembering she came out and stood here with me, and I just said, Dee Dee, can I reuse all this? And she goes, I like your thinking, you're going to be light on the side. I was like, okay. So we formed a pact, and in it went, very lovingly. I mean, it was installed at the equivalent level of any expensive stone that she could have imported. And that's what was so amazing. It elevated that material to be just fantastic, great contractors. And then we did things like with the water filter, we found the plumbing, and that's all we had to do is we just needed to turn the water back on. Done, not much there. And then in the big tank, we found its plumbing and we turned the water back on. And sometimes it's just a little bit of water, it's not much, and it's only on special occasions. So this kind of sensibility and this kind of experiment, at the smaller scale, you're going to see just just became bang big at Urban Outfitters. And I have to do a shout out to Debbie Koo. She's a former dirt girl, but as we say, once a dirt girl, always a dirt girl. She was instrumental on many projects, but especially Urban. So the garden experiments became big infrastructural experiments. And then what you can see is that what happened is that the Urban Outfitters decided their brands, their different brands, there's like many brands, not many, but like 5 brands, scattered throughout Rittenhouse Square. And they decided to make a big jump to Urban Outfitters when the Navy Yard was really kind of still pretty derelict. It was still This is an older photograph from the 40s, but still to this day, there are battleships in the Fleet Basin. And it has just this amazing, still kind of incredible feeling. If you don't go to the suburbanized side that Robert Stern did, but you keep in the grit, you know, of the working shipyard, it's absolutely wonderful. I also thought that it was so interesting to think about the idea of thinking about this working landscape at the scale, you know, of the button. And that kind of intimacy is a pretty interesting combination with this kind of bigger, longer history and big infrastructure. So I've always wondered how, you know, we could put together this past and future production. So this is the historic core, and classically, like any other industrial manufacturing site, the buildings are all long, they're numbered, they all are like in a row, like very happy thing, but and just, you know, just huge, you know. And then, you know, the importance of this site forensics with using historic photos, not to get all gooey and sentimental about them, but to really interrogate them. Like, we started looking at these and going, yum, you know, what are these rails, you know, what are, you know, they're all the flow of the production that's there. And then we were like, just have to hope that they're still there. Because, hold on. Okay. This is, sorry this is so fuzzy, it's all I had of this drawing that I was actually side by side with Dick Hayne, the founder of Urban Outfitters, and here's this idea of the action plan. I just was like, you know, Dick, you know, let's think about the rails, let's think about the gardens that would hang off of them, you know, how do they flow from building to building? And so it was just, you could see, we were just kind of going like this and making notes, and there was this incredible trust and this incredible understanding about what a framework would be, that we didn't have to make all the decisions, we knew how it would hang together. So we get to the site, and you're like, oh, damn, you know, but then, you know, if you get savvy about it, you see that crack? Frail. Yeah. So, and luckily the Navy, mostly rails are usually taken up for salvage, but luckily the Navy didn't need to do that. And it's amazing how it works, right? I mean, look at this space, building 12, building 15, you know, and you see the suite right in there. So for me, you know, you look at that space and it like completely designs itself. You just let it speak, you know, boom. Lawn for dogs, they have hundreds of dogs at Urban Outfitters, which is pretty fabulous. Expose the rail and put some cherries on top. I like doing that kind of silly femme thing, you know, there at the Navy Yard. It is like, they all love it. They say it's Instagram central when they're in bloom, you know, in bloom. So, this shows our pretty, you know, ambitious, although not terribly organized, somewhat organized idea about reuse. And this is a diagram that we put together showing the amount, you know, of demolition debris not going to the landfill. And I was telling the story about how Dick Hayne, we started to make the mistake of showing something like this to Dick Hayne, saying, well, there are these environmental benefits. And he goes, and I don't even know if you remember Al Gore, but he said, what are you, Al Gore? And I'm like, oh boy, you know, I knew from then on I was not going to talk about that at all, you know, so I just, like I said, I sneak sustainability in the back door. He talks aesthetics, I'll talk, woo, pretty, you know, it's great, you know, so anyway, so this is the same concrete system that I showed Dick from Turtle Creek, from Dallas, and he was like, I love it, you know, so in it goes. He doesn't care about anything else about it, you know, he just like loves it. So, And here's, I mean, you're Urban Outfitters, so they brand everything. And the contractors, we found out, you know, we're sifting through some Spanish, they were calling this concrete Barney rubble. So Barney was born. And Barney became a brand of his own and found life all throughout. It became kind of the palette of that landscape. And it took different forms of, like in a wild and woolly garden at Building 543, and then in other bits of life. So I always look at the image on the right, and like Dan Kiley one time, a landscape architect, said, you know, I didn't design it, but I'm going to take full credit for it. And then along came Betty, and Betty was all the smaller pieces of asphalt, concrete, and brick. And those were mulch. Those were the mulch of the trees. There were tree rows along all of the west sides of the buildings for solar protection. Everything was working. Nothing was ornamental. I mean, you could say the cherries were ornamental, but they were working it with those Instagrams. You know, so. And then, of course, who doesn't want to not be at the party? So when a lot of brick came out of construction, Wilma was in the house. One word, yum. Don't have to do a thing, except, you know, this is where we just projected up these arabesque lines with reclaimed steel walls, and then put in some native grasses. And in this case, it was really important to have some spaces where they would be immersed in spaces. They would be immersed rather than the kind of, it's such a jumbo landscape, you know, the planes are going over, the battleships are there. So there's this thing, my mentor, Michael Van Valkenburg, talks about it as the immense and the intimate, and how those things enrich each other's in terms of the experience. Then here you can just watch them, those grasses come up in spring, and then you can pretend that it's a runway. And then the larger, immense scale when they, a different phase where the dry dock became, we emphasized with Dick Hayne, with the urban folks, that we want to call it a park and not an exclusive part of the campus, so that it was much more of a shared space. And that's always a pretty interesting design problem, you know, in terms of not having a landscape field privatized. And then a quiet moment we call the sweet spot. Okay, the last piece, fallow cities. So I worked on, you know, many, you know, Dirt worked on many, you know, big mega, you know, the megafauna of industry and big sites. And I found myself getting increasingly interested in what I would call the collateral damage of those landscapes, and that was all these neighborhoods, all the context around them, you know, that were becoming, we don't like to say vacant, they became spacious because of the lost jobs and lost homes. But I like to use the word fallow because it suggests that it's like, you know, the ecological term disturbance, and that it's only part of a cycle, right? And that it's kind of poised to sprout, you know, when it gets the opportunity for that transformation. And for me, a big part of that fallowness had to do how the, you know, spontaneous vegetation has, you know, gleefully taken over these places, and that's a whole nother kind of landscape for folks to kind of get their heads wrapped around. And I think it's untapped, that we can work to have these wilds be very intentional. I was kind of thinking about, I used to call them wildlands, but then people were like scared of saying wildlands. So I was like, what about parkland? You know, different than parks, but parkland in terms of like a system of parkland like we had, you know, in, you know, the 19th century that organized entire cities. So, I think they can, I think they could be the kind of like, the whole fabric, you know, and then it could be punctuated with these, you know, like urban pieces within it. It's an idea that's been, you know, talked about with some folks, urbanists, about this kind of archipelago, you know, this idea of like not going to a suburban model of trying to regenerate wholesale, but to actually do these kind of implants, a type of depopulated urbanism. And I think there's a primary thing to, you know, understand that is kind of in a way, folks think it's difficult to work with spontaneous vegetation, is to like, you know, let it be. You know, it has its own logic. Learn the logic and work with that logic. And in cases, you know, like I've been showing before, you know, phytoremediation fields could become part of that fabric in cities. This is a prototype that one of the students did in our New Orleans studio. They all took on different persona, and she was the mud doctor. So, and I love this image that Fang Li did, where, you know, finding Core City and kind of what was designated, right, as parkland or green spaces, you know. She's like, what if you like poured glue into all of this and let it, you know, move around and become this network? And as you can see, when you do that, you start to get those little archipelagos, you know, and it's kind of like the folks that are still there, they're within this kind of like critically dense archipelago, right, with a continuous kind of network. So, so I've been working a lot in Core City in Detroit, and this is part of the neighborhood, and you can see in the zone all the kind of spacious and open land. And very typical of different than the megafauna of industry. I got so excited about, you know, well, there are thousands of these kind of 1- and 2-story former manufacturing buildings. And so this incredible developer, 32 years old, studied philosophy, called me, and the first thing he said was, I like to think about Core City as a park. I was like, who are you, you know? And so his whole idea was the landscape comes first, because people will come to it, and there'll be a there, and then you develop. Then you develop. Okay, so I arrived on the site, you know, Philip and I have this conversation. He goes, what's next? And I'm like, well, we have a first date. You know, you pay, of course, I come. You know. And so we're standing here, and Philip turns to me and said, what would you do? And I'm like, I don't know. Then I thought for a minute. I said, engine house, right? He said, yeah, engine house was there. And I said, when was it raised? And he said, 70s or so. And I said, probably pushed in the basement. A lot of stuff is pushed in the basement. So I said, dig. Next day, there was a backhoe on site, ready to dig. I mean, talk about trust. I just was like, whoa. So luckily, lo and behold, one day, that's Philip, the cornerstone of the engine house comes up. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, whew. They didn't know what year the engine house was, and so, I mean, So it just became literally the cornerstone of the park, but it's down on the ground. You know, everybody was like, oh, we should put it up on a pedestal. I went, no, 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 put it to work. You know, get it there down on the ground. So so the story, you know, of the site is just like the first thing, you know, that comes up out of people's mouths. The other pieces of sandstone were arranged. I didn't do any drawings, no drawings. You know, it was pretty luxurious. Design build in the field. And there were we made these little islands of red sandstone next to the reclaimed brick and concrete. And you know, every day the park got better, you know, and it was only through finding that it got better. This was an experiment with, I called it Bam Bam because I got the Flintstone thing, but this is when the backhoe would smash the concrete to make tree pits. And yeah, there is, with all the different surfaces. So the idea was this rich floor plane and then this, you know, urban canopy that would come up. And it made for like a really twiggy thing of understory trees and canopy trees. The black, that's black slag, and that is the byproduct of steel making. And I always like to think that it probably came from the River Rouge, another full circle. Oh, and you know, I mean, they keep everything when they dismantle buildings. They keep everything. It's so much fun. So I go to my candy store, and those are that's a wall out of a vault, saw cut and just, you know, floated up. And they're big and chunky and nice. And I've watched yoga. I've watched people sleeping on them. You know, picnics. And we also use this is off the shelf baseball benches. They're dugout benches. And the place is pretty great, you know, solo or, you know, packed with neighbors. And then I've continued to work, you know, with Prince Concepts, and in a way, it's starting to come true. This idea of this kind of like, you know, big field, you know, of landscape and these different little nuggets, you know, of development. And then I do have to count, you know, you can't not love a developer who counts trees more than he counts units. He'll tell you the number of trees first, and then the number of units. I mean, how lucky am I, geez. And here's another really typical, you know, pancake, you know, of a building. That then the strategy here was simply carve it open, you know, just make these sort of like clearings in a forest. Because they needed to put some utilities, you know, underneath and pretty much throughout, the floor had to come up, and Philip had them carefully saw cut and stockpile the entire floor, you know, and it's, I mean, and it's like now I'm like, I have my 5K pavers, you know, so and I get to use them any way I want, you know, so, and contractors there are totally into it. You can see they're just like maneuvering between ginkgo trees. It's hilarious. And then, you know, and the point here that I hope what you're getting is the juju of they're not too fancy pants. You know, the Quonset hut is all about an economy of means. You know, a beautiful space, but you know, at not that much money a square foot. And if you count the square feet of, you know, air. So, totally insane, giant Quonset hut. It's called the Caterpillar because of its little legs, you know, the windows there. Gorgeous spaces. And the question here, you know, was the scale thing, you know, because it's just sort of like, can't make it too domestic here, yet it needs to belong to the neighborhood. So the idea was like a urban forest, a spontaneous, forest. Philip said one day he came in and he goes, I had a dream that the caterpillar fell into a forest. I said, okay, all right, I'll do it. And so what we did, this was pretty fun. We found nurseries that had trees that they were about to, in the nursery trade, it's called pushover. They push over trees that are like not perfect and da-da-da-da. And so we got, I think this was 200 trees, and we call it the Misfit Forest. And a last project I'm going to show you is the one that is kind of the most mundane, if we put it at the bottom of the list of toxic, is the parking lot. So here we wanted to do exactly the opposite of what people do, and that is they do the parking lot and then they add the trees. So what we did is we drew, we filled the space conceptually, we mounded up here, and of, sumac and crazy ass, misfit trees. And then we just took our eraser and erased the space that was needed for each of the spots. So always, this kind of, cheap and cheerful thing on the left, those are little whips of sumac that are now like 20 feet tall. This was just a couple years ago, just cheap and cheerful to kind of make this parking. And in terms of a neighborhood, right, that he thinks, Philip thinks of as a park, this is to me, a new way of doing that. This is along the main thoroughfare, so that's what folks see when they come to Core City, and the park is across the street. So I'd like to end by saying that toxic beauty is not a dichotomy. It's not noxic orange versus beautiful blue, but it's a dialectic. One where conflicting forces, like I was talking about, are interdependent, and the landscapes are a total mashup of orange and blue, much like your fans. Thanks. Couldn't resist. Maybe we don't put this one up.
Maybe we go back to the last thing that you had from the last project.
Oh, okay. How about just that?
There you go.
Because that's my drainage. What?
I got mine. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you. What we want to do is maybe start the conversation out of here and then open it up to the room. And we plotted a little bit at lunch today to think about some of the topics we might talk about. One of the topics I wanted to raise, especially for our students, those that have stuck it out, is the topic of time and temporal representation. But it occurs to me that we're talking, to use another word today, legibility. Yeah. It seems like that's actually, those two words are entangled with one another. It occurs to me that one of the things that you're doing in your work, and this goes to this gesture, is to try to use the idea of traces of materiality, traces of time, traces of human occupation, but also the traces of these substances. To tease them out as ways of starting to produce desire lines or edge lines or conditions in the work. Could you talk a little bit more about that idea of legibility, making something readable?
Well, I was thinking, I was, as you were speaking, I think, I was thinking of our site forensics and the importance of evidence. And I think the evidence are like the traces. And the evidence is, yeah, the evidence is what makes time legible. You know, and then you can see it, and then you can think about the speed at which these things move, you know, or don't move, and try to kind of calibrate that. I mean, if there was something that I, you know, would still like to do is that kind of like understanding the pace of things. I always assumed to go slower. I mean, yeah, wow.
It seems like one of the things that you're also teasing out is that there's not one time. There are multiple times in each one of these sites. There's geological time, there's industrial time, there's the half-life of the substances that are on these sites. There's the immediacy of the occupation, there's the spontaneity of the design process in which there's discovery and redeployment of materials. The one thing that's not fixed, the one time that is left truly open, is what happens on the site 20 years later, 30 years later. It seems like that's important for you, for it to be open-ended like that.
Totally, totally. And and now that now that I'm thinking about it, I do think that there are, I always refer to them as different clocks. You know, like, oh, there's that clock. It's kind of like you could put them up on a wall, like different cities, you know, the different parts of, you know, different aspects of the site. And there are some that where it's like, I often think about that in terms of, this is maybe a weird digression, about the time of the client, the time of the person. I mean, Dick Hayne is not young, you know, and I remember thinking about faster things to do along with the slower ones, you know. I mean, the cherries are fast, you know. Yeah. And so I hadn't really thought about that, but I definitely do it. You know, I think it's a really smart thing to do, because I think also, you know, my criticism of master plans, even if they do quote unquote phases, they're not really time based. It's all kind of logistical, tactical, whatever all those stupid words are. You know that. Yeah. That turn out to actually be short-sighted in the end, you know. I'm also thinking about what you were saying about 20 years later, because urban is now, you know, it's not that old, but it's pretty old. You know, the landscape's 10 years old now, more, Debbie? Yeah, more. And I was just there recently, and it was so interesting to see what they had done and how they talk about it, because you could see they like understood. They were just doing some stuff. I was like, it's just fine, you know, great, you know, cool. I just was like, they were like, and Dick was like, well, what do you think of what we did? I said, it's great, you know. It's like, so that was nice. It was nice. Some things, some experiments that basically didn't work, you know. He just said, well, we thought, you know, and then he kind of spewed back the intention. He said, so we did it this way. I was like, so fabulous. So if he can impart that kind of stuff, I think it's, you know, that's a bonus. You know, if you really, you know, ignite stuff more than prescribe it, that makes it elastic.
Yeah, maybe building on that, I from our conversation earlier, and you know, we talked a little bit about the gradients in your work and how you have to really kind of think about these different gradients of we were initially talking about scale and just the kind of severity going from toxicity to just something derelict, but you also mentioned today in the talk about transformation and kind of gradient of transformation. And you know, it's very, very apparent in the work that you're having to kind of work through so many kind of levels of scale. And I think many of the students, really have a challenge to kind of face that.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I don't, maybe I'm seeing this, I think we talked a little bit about it, but the idea of prototyping as a way to kind of deal with those scales and those jumps. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit more about that, because I think prototyping, we were talking about that, it's like that's a really critical way of maybe trying to approach the work, because there's so many different kind of gradients to do it.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I have found the good thing is the terms prototype and demonstration project, are not scary. They're less scary to clients in communities, because you're like, oh, you're just going to try this out? Yeah, we're just going to try it out. Sneak in stuff. So I just think that, I don't know, maybe I even just try to, think of all my projects just like that. They're just different size prototypes, because they add up to, I would say though that maybe some can add up more readily to kind of like work on the larger scale, versus others that may not. But now that you say that, it's kind of interesting, like how far can Barney go, and yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm just thinking about our different experiments, like in Core City, because I've been wanting to find ones that can ramp up to the scale of the neighborhood, and we're not quite there yet, and surprisingly, Philip is a little nervous. He's got other stuff on his mind right now, but I'm kind of waiting till I can pounce and get to this. I really want to get to this thing about fallow land. I mean, I would love to get to it. I think it's it. Germans can do it, we can do it.
Yeah, it goes to the kind of idea that iteration for you takes many projects, it takes many life cycles. Yeah, going back to some of the time issues, like the iterative process for you seems very much because of the kind of gradient of scale, and just how much something can transcend time, and you can see in many of the kind of iterative processes in each of the projects that prototyping, as Barney has, right? It just kind of keeps re-emerging in places to be able to develop an idea around that, which I think is something that students and many people, like, it's a challenge to kind of have the stamina to deal with it, but I think it's fascinating.
I'm thinking I have to say, with large sites, I would say, man, it would be so hard to put in like a good big infrastructural framework, or that piece, because like that's why I was like, thank God we had the rails at Urban Outfitters, I did build off, and then I built off the buildings by doing these giant hedgerows, there. But we're super fortunate to have this big stuff, to do that. I don't know what we would have done otherwise, and because it's interesting, I'm just even kind of wincing because I'm thinking about this kind of experimental planting I did in Core City, and it just didn't work. It wasn't the right scale. Philip wasn't happy with me. Damn it. So, anyway, so I get it wrong. Oops.
That's part of the process.
Yeah. But big stuff, you're mostly going to find it. I think on any site it can be found. And probably my mistake on this one site in Core City is I didn't find the big bones. And I was trying to put in big bones with small ones. And I was like,
it seems also like that process of site discovery for you is in essence a kind of drawing. That there's, if we look at the presentation, you know, I think that representations of sites, sometimes they were technical, but it seems as if there's a kind of an emergent property to the materials that you find, or especially the gesture of the rails. Right? Like that's the moment where the top-down mentality would want to impose that curve on the site, and instead you seem to hesitate. You're not willing to do that, which is to say it's a kind of a sort of bracketing of the design imagination.
Restraining
Restraining of the design imagination. To let the site do the drawing, to let the site do the imaging for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say, as reflecting more and more on the methodology, it's just like, I kind of realized that I was like, oh, restraint. So now I kind of feel like I can talk about it, I often do it all part of the restraint. But anyway, it comes around to, that's hand in hand with this whole thing that I became obsessed with for myself and in my teaching about the idea of curation, about the addition, the subtraction, and leaving well enough. It was really fascinating to do with the students. It was. I mean, like I practice it, just watching them. I'm like, I would do this thing where like only addition, and they do something, and then I said I always wanted mid, medium, max. So they had this sliding scale, and I'd say now subtraction, and then both leave, and always we all leave well enough alone, and then some of them would put these sliding scales of the addition and the subtraction, and they found they said themselves they were doing some things they wouldn't have expected they would do, which was great because they had to push, to those kind of and it's learning a tipping point, which I think is super duper important.
Questions from the audience? Was that you raising your hand? All right.
Hello, my name is Ivan. Thank you so much for sharing these mind-blowing, sometimes counterintuitive, but very beautiful projects. And in all these projects, it's evident that the interdisciplinary process is very important. And particularly in your seminal work, the Vintendel Reclamation Park, you described you gathered an ideal team of artists, historians, and engineers and scientists. And wondering, could you please expand on the collaboration?
Yeah. No, I mean, I love them, and I mean, because a lot of times I know it's like landscape architects, and maybe you guys as architects feel like when you're doing a project and you don't have these kind of team members, you're doing a really half-assed job of history, a half-assed job of science, a half-assed job, So, you work directly with each one of these disciplines, and it's like, but the important role here that I always find is that is translator. Because at the end of the day, right, the thing that what you're working on is going to be a form of a design proposition, right? So that's why you even saw me like side by side with the scientist, at Vittendale, trying to understand, and going, how does that translate, and then work with the historian. I'm like, how would what you're telling me be felt? That's what's great, about it. So, wish I brought this one drawing I did. It was very manic, not surprising, that I did with an engineer about a water system for a building. And it was just so great because I was, we were working, it was a project with Coal House on the old power plant. And we did this, my flow diagram as just the landscape architect would have been like, probably, you know. But I was sitting with the engineer, and we went through the whole, like through the buildings, through it was so complex and beautiful, you know. I wouldn't have been able to do that, you know. We even calculated the gallons of water. He was a total nerd, you know. So that's the position to get in. I mean, I know you might not have that, you know, luxury, you know, here at school, but you could, in a way, when you're kind of maybe doing research into the science of your project, be conscious of like, okay, how would I translate this? Not just take it in, not just and spit it back out. That's not helpful. You know, it's, yeah, translate.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you it's great to see 30 years of work, right? Little Julie in New Jersey, playing the song. I guess my question for you is, okay, 30 years, and you know, what gives you hope? Hope about the agency of our disciplines, or hope about, you know, the opportunity to open minds?
Yeah.
I mean, has anything changed? A lot has changed, or has nothing changed?
I guess the thing again so significant about the more current work in recent work in Core City and of that kind of world, you know, of abandonment, disinvestment, is I use the word optimism a lot. You know, and I mean I feel that at the park. You know, there's just an incredible feeling of optimism. Everybody, you could feel the hope oozing from people there.
Even the misfit trees?
And the misfit trees. Yeah. No, they're all kind of saying, we're trying, we're doing our best. Not even trying, we're doing our best. And what do you think? You know, so that's where I feel it most. So, and I think that's probably why I'm drawn, you know, to that work. So it's another thing to have, you know, to convince Ford to do something, you know, and, you know, I guess that's a form of hope, but I don't know. It's not as at a very base level, where I think it's pretty important.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It occurs to me also in relation to hope that you need a lot of patience to do what you do. But I guess my observation, my question revolves around more contemporary thoughts. You work at a very large scale on mostly 20th century industrial landscapes. And in the 21st century, in not dissimilar kind of locations and with similar ambitions to make stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Political entities compete for companies to be near them and employ people and make very large concessions to do things like toxify the environment. So there's one here, there's a big company called Micron. And the deal is that they can pollute for 5 years. And I think mess up Oneida Lake for 5 years, at which time they will then have to, in their words, invest in reclamation. So it's like a $100 billion investment and promise 50,000 jobs at multiple levels. What would you say to the county who looks at your work, here's the interesting thing, I think. It says, see, we can do it. We can do it, we can reclaim it.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
First of all, what is this, like, 5 years that they're allowed to pollute?
Well, okay, so one of the great assets about the state of New York is the water that we have here. And this big plant needs a lot of water. And then they also need to, all of the water that moves through needs to go somewhere.
Okay.
That's my very, very,
Yeah.
basic kind of non-understanding of what it is. But I think that the understanding is that that will go on for 5 years before they have the time to then invest in reclamation. Because they can't,
Oh man,
they can't do it.
I'm like wanting to do a diagram of that flow diagram right now. That's just crazy. I mean, clearly the process by which they're doing business is dubious. But no, seriously, I would, I just can't help but think I would be doing a flow diagram. I'd be doing a flow diagram of all of that kind of operation, and then wondering where, like I would say to my students, like, where can you go in, to influence that operation? And I also thought about how with mining reclamation, the laws dictated to the companies that they had to completely integrate, not this kind of like 5 years and then it was integrated into mining, the reclamation was. And it's really interesting because it changed the way they mined. And it became much more seamless. So that comes to mind too, is like, why isn't there an integration of the kind of the use of the water and the treatment of the water? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
A long-term
Yeah, just
agenda
make
starting out.
it, again, this not this dichotomy, make it this kind of dialectic, make it this kind of intertwined kind of thing, because it one, would probably not have as big an impact, and two, like I was saying, there's very good likelihood that that would have them change the business as usual. The first part about the use of the water, to my mind. That's a good one. That's a studio.
Come and convince them to do business differently.
Yeah. Yeah. But see, this is where you got to be really smart, and you got to do your homework, and because it was like a board. Once we showed them that we were understanding exactly the coking operation that was going, what was going on there. They were like, oh, and then we said we want to go in, right there. We want to interject, because their thing was going to be, totally hog and haul, it's called. They were going to haul everything out, everything, and we're like, yeah, to where, And instead we just said, mix it up.
Ladies or questions?
Sounds wild.
They're still doing the EIS.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that you put those two words, toxic and
Who is
beautiful.
this person? Oh.
Hi. I'm Cindy. Thank you for sharing. And I really appreciate those two words, toxic and beauty, put together, because it's kind of like the coin of what we're usually conceive as the dark side into the other side of it, see the possibility of it. But sometimes I'm wondering, what if the condition is getting to a level that is too much toxin in it, to the level that architects are kind of incapable to even touch those lines, such as the nuclear emission, or a lot of the landfill actually, we're not that able to have some Who do you think our architects then should be in such conditions
Yeah.
when we're like in a kind of powerless situation?
A great question, because it actually is related to, which I never even talk about like the years I worked on Superfund sites with the EPA, and I often felt powerless, you know, but it was always about paying attention to the context, you know, because I worked on landfills too. And there may be a technology that maybe we can't quite intervene in, you know, but the fact is that, you know, landfills are completely done out of convenience, like where they are and how they operate. And that has an impact on the context, you know, for what, you know, the other parts of it. So that's a thing of understanding the operation, you know, from just a truck coming and turning into a landfill, or even further back. That's important. You got to trace the whole damn thing, the whole waste stream, you know, to then kind of go, aha, I can go in right here, you know, and preferably we get better and better of, you know, where it is that we can find our way in. The super toxic stuff, man, oy, 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 you know, I found we were working a lot on perceptions of the toxicity of the communities around them. And we were, again, this was the importance of the translating, because EPA folks are not very good at articulating things. They are not trained as community social people. We were translating for them, which is super important, because especially with super toxic stuff and things like landfills that are they're not as toxic anymore. They can't be. I found that it was really important to do the exercise of what's hot and what's not for the community, you know, because they think of, a lot of people look at a site and they go, that is one giant toxic blob, you know. And in fact, you know, probably, you know, I'm thinking about the Roebling Superfund site, the steel site in Jersey, you know, and I worked on it with students, and, you know, I would say 1/10 of the site was hot, and the rest was not. You know, so there was a whole different attitude about how, you know, that part of the site would be treated. They understood, and people understood, that's how it's being treated, and at this pace. But this other part of the site is going to be, you know, we can work into it, you know, at a different pace and safely, you know. So I don't know, those things come to mind. Again, it's all about legibility. It's all about letting them see it, make it spatial, because folks can't see it.
Maybe one last question.
Who do I get it to? Someone's vague. All right.
This is kind of going back to the previous question, but I just wanted to ask, like you mentioned a little bit about like moving forward to the Rouge Factory, which I got to go to like a couple months ago. It was very neat. They are very proud of all of the greenery and stuff on their tours, but I just wanted to ask, how do you convince people to invest in these, especially on like a larger scale where it obviously would cost a lot of money?
Invest in what?
Like reclamation or like cleaning up these spaces.
Well, there's this whole, you know, there is this whole thing depending on the kind of level of contamination that they have to now, because of regulations. There still is the whole thing of, you know, don't ask, don't tell, you know, of sites.
which, which I have to say the whole Brownfields program has tried to kind of diminish basically the appearance of and reality of red tape around it. I think what's difficult, the difficulty I've had is convincing people to do more holistic reclamation and often slower reclamation and on-site reclamation. They have to decide. I mean, unfortunately, but I mean, I can articulate all the benefits, of it, but I still have clients, which I'm, anyway, flash you to the project. Well, I've had many clients just say, why should I do this? I think that it would be nice, and maybe the next step in environmental regulations will be incentives for these more holistic approaches. I mean, they're doing things like there's the D.I.R.T, the volunteer remediation program. So they're getting that improved. Like a number of people that will basically come forth and say, I have brownfields, and they give them, they get them off the hook legally and yada yada yada. But in terms of actual, remediation, is sometimes you will say that, especially with toxins, it is remediation. Not there yet. Only if they have to, I think. I would say generally, my impression is only if they have to.
Along those lines,
That wasn't very optimistic. Hi, Tom.
It occurs to me, having got to meet you today and to talk with you, one of the things that might also address that question is just the way you use words. Words are both something that are precise, but also something that produce effects. Not just the way you talk, but the way that you talk about how you talk to other people, both listening to their clients, but also choosing your words carefully, knowing which words are going to, we're starting to learn which words are going to trigger certain responses by the client. Yeah. Seducing them into the process. I think it's getting them to buy into the process that I've picked up on from you.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of storytelling. Because I find that rather than trying, I'll be a little bit more optimistic now. Rather than convincing, I would say I tell stories. Like I'm thinking of Duquesne again. There was this beautiful room called the acid room. It was actually quite scary because of the stuff that went on in there. And I was telling the story about the acid room. And then we went into, discussions about what to do with the acid room, and he wanted to obliterate it, basically. And I just went, I just was disappointed because I was like, I guess my story didn't get to you, because he just was like, why should I do this? And I said, because 150 people were here before you, jerk. And but I find that's and what that does is, I have found with the storytelling is that what that does is I mean, this is going to sound pretty hokey, but I'm giving voice to the landscape, not me. So it's putting the landscape it's putting the client or community in the position of responding to the landscape. Not what I'm kind of dictating as a designer to do. Just say, here's what's here, and it speaks to you, or
you know, you value it or you don't, or you, yeah.
Yeah, the question of legibility, being able to
Yeah.
tease out these,
Yeah.
what's really latent in the site, within
Yeah.
the landscape, and how do you bring that out and make it legible?
But
so that
it's,
people are aware.
it's really so much damn fun, because, you know, what you do is kind of classic, but, you know, I hate, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it, I hate this community engagement bullshit, you know? It can just always be this kind of like stupid ass patronizing shit, you know? And I'd rather, like, at Ford, it's like, I said, do you know anybody who worked up on the coke ovens? You know, and I was like, okay, I'll go talk to the guy who worked on the coke ovens, you know, and so you just are, you like seek out the storytellers, you know, and, you know, voila, you know, that's another way to get the history of the site. You know, if you don't have a historian, just, really, seriously, I just go, and you know what? So many times, they're so happy that you're interested. They're like, nobody asked me before, you know? And then you can ask all sorts of things after that. Can you get me this map? Oh yeah, what map is it on? It's right over there.
The artist seduction.
I think too much Dan thought is a good place to stop. Thank you very much.